Welcome to the Big Meat Kickoff. It is Thursday, February 9th, and we are getting closer to the 2023 NFL Draft. And as I promised you earlier this week, I was going to bring in somebody who knows far more about the process than I do. And I like to fancy myself as somebody who knows a thing or two about the draft. Ian Cummings from the Pro Football Network, draft analyst. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. You give me too much credit. Draft season is always just a wild card, man. It's just the best we can do is get through it, try and learn as much as we can, and always exciting to see what ultimately goes down in April because it's never what you expect. But that's the best part about it. So
Well, yeah, exactly. They have, people put out mocks, and we'll talk about yours in a minute, and then
yeah,
they give the contest for fans to go out there and make these picks. And we don't know what teams have in mind in terms of trades. Obviously, right off the bat, the Chicago Bears, number one pick. They have a quarterback in Justin Fields. Do they have a quarterback in Justin Fields? Bryce Young on the board. So many things that we can get into. But let's kind of start off a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about Pro Football Network for people who are not familiar. I certainly am aware of you guys, but maybe not all my viewers are.
yeah. So it's just it's a site we started up as a startup a few years ago, and it's grown a lot. We have multiple departments: draft, NFL, betting, fantasy, the works, right? So if you're looking for information on any of those, we have the department for it, and it's a wide ranging, vast amount of content, and I'm just happy to be a part of it. We went to the Shrine Bowl, the Senior Bowl. We've got guys to the Super Bowl providing great content right now as we speak. So it's a great company, a lot of different ranges and different departments, but the draft is just a small part of it, but it's a good team.
One of these years, I'm going to get down to the Shrine Bowl and try and eat my weight in peanut butter cups, since Reese's is involved in that, and that would be a lot of peanut butter cups, obviously. And I don't think I could do it. But let's get right into the Senior Bowl. Dawand Jones, offensive lineman for Ohio State, goes down there. Reportedly has a really good build-up leading up, and then pulls out, dealing with some headaches. I mean, just first and foremost, your impressions of a guy who really is still learning to play football. He was a basketball player in Indianapolis. Even when he was signed by Ohio State, there wasn't that full buy-in there immediately, and that's by his own admission. Finally bought in, and now seems to be one of the more intriguing prospects because there's kind of seems to be a wide range of opinions on him.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta start with the size, right? I mean, that's the first thing that stands out. And I can't remember the exact measurements, but I want to say, over 89-inch wingspan, which is just insane. Like if that holds up at the combine, I believe it's going to be the longest wingspan ever recorded for an NFL player, right? So the guy is huge, and that shows up on tape. I mean, he towers over everyone he plays against, around 6'8", 359 pounds, right? So, massive wingspan, reach, and he can dominate guys with it. As soon as he extends his arms, it's over for you, right? It does come with its drawbacks, right? Offensive line leverage is a very important part of the position, right? And being as big as he is, naturally it's going to be a little difficult to manage that sometimes. That said, I think for his size, he does it very well. And early on in the Senior Bowl, we saw he got off to a really strong start, was just locking guys down. So I think that that shows the dominating skill set that he has. The leverage is going to factor into my grade a little bit. And I think, at his size too, there's a little bit of concern about flexibility, lateral agility, recovery, right? But I do think if you're looking for a right tackle, which usually that's going to be the guy that's in the quarterback's line of vision, right? So a little easier for the quarterback to make adaptations if he needs to, right? So you want a guy like Dawand Jones. If he can just pummel defenders and just, render them into submission early in reps, he's got the tools to do that. So I think, the Senior Bowl was big for him. I think the combine, he's going to test well for his size, and the size alone is going to win over some coaches. So I would definitely expect him to be a top 50 pick.
And you say right tackle, and one of the questions that we had over at Buckeye Huddle was, is there any chance that he could play left? I mean, he played right at Ohio State with Paris Johnson Jr. playing left. He's familiar with the right side, but could somebody out there just say, well, he's just so big he eclipses the sun. I mean, we think that if we work with him, that we could have a 6, 8, 10 year left tackle, or is it all on the right?
I would prefer the right for him. I think with his build, right? I think if you're looking for a left tackle, right, as you mentioned, that's the blind side for most quarterbacks. You got Tua, but he's the only left-hander, right? So it's like usually that's going to be the blind side. So that's the side that you want a guy who's a little bit, and Dawand Jones, for his size, to his credit, is light on his feet. For his size, he's actually pretty athletic, right? But, at that size, you're naturally going to have some issues with recovery athleticism sometimes. If a guy, offsets you and works you too far this way, it can be a little bit more difficult to recover and recenter yourself. And we did see that a little bit against Georgia, a little bit over the course of 2022. I think he improved with his footwork and his efficiency, but it's just always going to be a little bit of a concern for him. So I think where you want him is at right tackle. So at least he's in the quarterback's line of vision. So it is easier for the quarterback to make those adjustments. But as I said, I don't think it doesn't make him a liability in any stretch in that department. And I think, you look at the strength and the power, put him at right tackle. I think that's where he's natural. That's where his build fits the best. And it's where he can be a dominant player.
You mentioned him as a top 50 type of player. What is the ceiling for him in terms of draft? I mean, we all love to use the cliche. It only takes one team. It only takes one team to fall in love with him for him to go 5 spots, 10 spots, 15 spots higher than he should. And we see that all the time. Is if he blows that up at the combine, tests really well, goes through all of that, follows that up with strong pro days, could he slide into the first round, or is that, or is that a bit of a pipe dream for Ohio State fans?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned cliches, right? Never want to be a fan of them, but as a draft analyst, I reluctantly submit like they do. There is some merit to them, right? It does take one team. That's all it takes, right? If a team really likes a guy, has him graded super high, we've seen it in past years, right? Like Cole Strange from last cycle, no one really thought that he was going to go round one, but the Patriots really liked him, so he went round one. And other teams probably liked him as well, but all this is to say, all 32 teams have different factors that they carry in, different grades, different variables, right? So it's just a nebulous process with a ton of ranging outcomes. So I think all it does take is one team. And I do think with his dominating size, I mean, the athleticism for that size, the elite power component, you look at those things, that's enough for him to be a potential first round pick. Now, obviously, as a draft analyst, you got to throw the probabilities in there. What are the percent chances? I would say probably less than 50%, but it's still there. It's still a chance that he does sneak in, and especially the back end of round one. You look at teams like the Bengals, the Chiefs, both could need a right tackle right next year. So Darnell Wright from Tennessee is another option, but Dawand Jones is there too. And looking at the size that he possesses, he's a rare player, right? So those are the kinds of guys that you do take early. So I think there's a chance for sure.
Let's stick with the Ohio State offensive line. Talk a little Luke Wypler. Surprised a lot of Ohio State fans, maybe even a couple coaches, by coming out, leaving eligibility on the table. Ohio State center. I mean, how much stock in the Georgia game is going to be taken into account for Wypler? I mean, he obviously, the interior offensive line for Ohio State had quite a challenge going against Jalen Carter for UGA. Carter was largely ineffective in that game in terms of being the disruptive force that he was in pretty much every other game. I think it's a case of film only carries you so far. People are going to want to see you at the combine. Wypler's one of 8 Buckeyes to be invited to the NFL scouting combine. But is that going to be something that weighs in there in terms of the evaluation of what Wypler can do at especially in a center draft that doesn't appear to be incredibly deep this year?
Yeah, I think it could factor in for sure. I think it won't factor in a crazy amount, right? Because I do think context is needed with that performance. Jalen Carter, the few reps that Wypler did face him, he did well. And I think some of the things that I wanted to see from Wypler in that game, staying square, getting his hands up quick. And I think one thing that shows up a lot for him is, he's a strong guy, but, he is 6'3", 300. So, a little bit lighter sometimes than the guy that you're facing across from you. So when they get initial contact and when they start to generate power, sometimes it can be a little difficult for him to stall that rush and really prevent displacement, right? But I do think when he went up against Jalen Carter, he was doing a really good job of replacing his hands, establishing that anchor and holding that ground. That said, he didn't face Jalen Carter head on a ton of reps because they did slide Dawand Jones over a lot to disrupt Jalen Carter. They doubled them sometimes. They did combo blocks on him, right? And then Jalen Carter was also stunting outside sometimes, facing Paris Johnson and Jones again on the outside. So every rep is different for every defensive lineman, but especially Carter because he's so dynamic and versatile. So you have to kind of isolate those reps where he did face Wypler. I think Wypler did play well, and I think that he did show some improvement over things that I wanted to see improvement on throughout the season. Testing is going to be big for him, but I think he's pretty athletic in space, and I think he's got good proportional length. So I think the measurements will be good for him. I could definitely see him working his way into day two. And like you said, with the center class, Cedric Van Pran from Georgia was a guy that I really liked. He ended up going back to school, so that opens up a little bit of a void for Wypler to move his way up the board. I think that Georgia game was a great way to end the season for him. Again, you got to isolate those reps, right? You can't just say, "Oh, Jalen Carter was quiet, so it was a good day." But you look at the reps, and it does translate. You can cross check, and it's there. And I think that the offseason will be good for him, and things are kind of adding up for him to move up the board. And I can see him being a potential starter pretty early on in his career. Would prefer zone schemes for him, but I think he can be a little versatile for you.
And now we'll talk, of course, the third Ohio State offensive lineman who should really be the first one we're talking about, and that's Paris Johnson Jr., another player who leaves eligibility on the table, but this one came as no surprise. He really has taken care of business. His first year of playing, he played at guard because Ohio State just needed to get him out there, and then he slides over to his more natural position of tackle. In your most recent mock draft, you have him going number 14 overall to New England. What sets Paris Johnson Jr. apart in terms of what you've seen, and why would he be such a good fit with the Patriots?
Yeah, so I think, the upside is the big selling point for me. And I think that he did show some development his first collegiate season at left tackle. He played it in high school, right? So it wasn't his first introduction to it, but making that adjustment back from the interior to the blind side, right? It's going to be a little bit of an adjustment for you. And I think he handled it well. The first thing that comes to mind with him is the combination of explosiveness and length. That's one thing, especially in the trenches, right? For power generation, you need that burst off the line. You need that length so you can fully extend, outreach guys, and make contact first, and then kind of, lock them down on the edge. And he's shown he can do that. He's a really good lateral athlete. I love the recovery athleticism from him. I think the footwork can still be a little bit cleaner. Sometimes he leaves his torso a little too open, right? He's got to kind of correct that. He can use independent hands more often, more efficiently. So not a, completely refined prospect right now, but you look at the explosiveness and the power as a run blocker and the recovery as a pass blocker. I think there's a lot of good things there. And when he's able to latch, he shows really good functional strength too. So, I think for the Patriots, looking at, having Trent Brown and Isaiah Wynn, but maybe they're going to move on from Wynn and maybe move Trent Brown to right tackle or move on from him too. So I think there's a need potentially for two tackles if you're New England, and having a guy like Paris Johnson who's got the tools to really be a good pass protector with more development, but also with that running back stable, Ramondre Stevenson, Damian Harris. I mean, they got guys, and we know they like to maintain that balance on the ground. And Paris Johnson, one thing that really shows up on his tape, he can be a road grader on the ground game with his combination of tools. He can just plow through defenders. He can plow open lanes. He's got that power capacity, that power element to his game that I love. And he's really good at acquiring leverage too. For a guy who's 6'6", sometimes you worry that they play a little too tall. That's usually not an issue with him. He's able to load his base, get under guys, and just drive home. So I love that element of his game too. And I think you look at the upside, the athletic, physical traits that are there, it's a great foundation for what he can become.
You're watching the Big Meat Kickoff here on BuckeyeHuddle.com. I'm joined by Ian Cummings of Pro Football Network, and we are talking NFL Draft. Be sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. All of that helps us out with the algorithm. We really appreciate it. And be sure to check out all of Ian's work over at Pro Football Network. You can get him at, I believe it's at IC_draft. And of course, you can find them too at PFN 365. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
all
sir.
right. Wanted to make sure I got all my plugs in there right. Let's talk quarterback. That's what I think what a lot of Ohio State fans are. Probably a lot of Ohio State fans wondering why I didn't lead with this. In your mock draft, you have the Bears trading down with Indianapolis. Indianapolis has that first pick. Indy needs a quarterback. Drum roll, please. Who do you have them selecting?
Yeah, so Ohio State fans gonna be happy. It is CJ Stroud. And again, I wanna preface by saying this because a lot of people they only see one mock draft that I write and they talk about it like it's the only mock draft I write. Guys, I've written probably a dozen mock drafts so far this year. Everyone's gonna be a little bit different. I learned very early on a mock draft is not a prediction to just set in stone. It's a way to address different probabilities and kind of explore a little bit. So I have CJ Stroud going number one this time. Maybe in another mock draft, I have him going number 6 or 7, right? But in this one, he does go number one because I think, he, along with Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson and Will Levis, even, there is a chance that he could go number one. I think all four of those guys have a chance, right? So you got to address that. But yeah, CJ Stroud goes number one. The Colts, I think he fits their prototype. He's got the size at around 6'3", 218. But, to me, he's probably the best pocket operator in the class. And we saw that against Georgia, but also all throughout the year. Had a few hiccups here and there, but the accuracy, the processing ability, I love a lot of what he has to offer. And he's got good tools as well.
One of the big knocks on Ohio State is that Ohio State has not been able to produce NFL quarterbacks for whatever that is worth. I mean, we're seeing the maturation process of Justin Fields in Chicago. I mean, obviously, the late Dwayne Haskins didn't necessarily have a great start with the Washington football team. I guess they were the football team at that point, and his life was taken way too short. Troy Smith wins a Heisman, ends up getting sick with Baltimore. Joe Flacco walks through that door, and that's the end of Troy Smith. I mean, we can go through the list. I mean, does that kind of stuff just really resonate with fans, or in your experiences, is it like, well, this is just a program that might produce great college quarterbacks, but it just doesn't work at the next level?
hmm I don't take it into account. As an analyst, it resonates with fans a lot. You see that, well, Ohio State hasn't produced a good quarterback or, in any other school, right? As an analyst, you got to stay away from that because it's a form of bias, right? That kind of association, you got to look at every prospect in a case by case lens because every prospect is different. Every mental makeup is different. Every physical makeup, every, culmination of traits is different, right? So you can't use those general broad swath solutions on guys. Well, he's from Ohio State, so it's probably not going to work out because it has in the past. CJ Stroud is not those guys. He's his own prospect, and you got to look at him like that. And I think if you don't do that as an analyst, if you kind of fall into that pit of Ohio State, so probably not, you could be missing out on a great player. So I think every situation is different. It's really important to stay flexible and keep it case by case and eliminate bias. And, that is the form of bias. So as an analyst, you got to cut it out. You got to say no to that stuff.
Asked a lot about this one, and I probably am pretty vocal too, but I want to hear your opinion on Will Levis. Started off at Penn State, transferred to Kentucky. Certainly has the physical tools. He looks like the guy. I think there might be some debate amongst fans that he necessarily showed things in the college game that will translate. You mentioned him as one of you put a group of top 4 quarterbacks out there. What is it that makes Will Levis so intriguing to so many people around the sport, and what is it that people may not be seeing in terms of for whatever reason that they don't see in Levis coming out of the fan space?
Yeah, so we're seeing kind of two factions emerge early on, right? You've got some people who have Levis as their QB1, and then some who, don't even think he should be in that discussion to be the top guy off the board. I am closer to the latter. He's graded considerably lower than the top 3 for me personally. Now, that's not to say he's a bad quarterback prospect. I want to make that clear. Some people kind of run with that and, becomes hyperbole, like, oh, he has no business going that high. Everyone's evaluation is going to be different. You got to have room for that. You got to have respect for it. And I can see why people would be high on Levis. And I'm high on the upside for sure. 6'3", 230 pounds. I mean, you see him get out in space. He's a tank as a runner. I mean, he's super tough as nails in the pocket, great competitor. And that alone is something that's going to win over NFL coaches. On top of that, he's got a rocket arm. He's really good at generating easy velocity, in the short, intermediate, and deep ranges. He's shown he can throw a touch. He's got that arm elasticity to adjust his angles, right? So I love that as well. I think for me, with Will Levis too, coming into 2021, he only had, I think, just over 100 career attempts at that point. So was still a pretty young, green passer, and he needed that 2021 season to develop. We gave him the benefit of the doubt, a little turnover prone that year. wanted to see progression in 2022. And I don't think we saw enough linear progression to move him up. I still think the upside is very much there because he's a great athlete. He's got an elite arm, right? So I think that alone combined with toughness is going to be good for him. And I think in the right situation, he can thrive. But you look at the tape, some of the areas where he's stagnated in 2022, pocket awareness can be pretty, can be stagnant when it comes to sensing pressure around the edge and managing the pocket and keeping himself alive. The field vision can be a little slow at times, can have a kind of a slow internal clock in the pocket. And there's times where he's not very good at anticipating over the middle of the field. There are flashes for sure. There are flashes, but I think, there's still a lot of room for him to grow and the game to slow down for him. It hasn't quite done that yet. And especially, with him and Richardson, the discussion is all about upside with those guys. Well, Richardson is 21 years old. Levis is going to be a 24-year-old rookie. So a little bit older, the developmental track is a little bit shorter. So having a little bit less time to work with. And also you worry that, being as old as he is as a prospect, maybe he's a little more settled into his ways, right? So that all comes into account, but the upside is there. And again, it's up to NFL teams to really get in the room with him and talk to him one-on-one and see if he has the mental makeup worth investing in, because the tools are there. I think for me, he hasn't shown the growth that I would want from a guy with that upside to take him that high, number one overall. But I do think the upside, the athletic tools, the elite arm talent, that is worth betting on somewhere around one.
We haven't even talked about the Heisman winner, Bryce Young, at this point. There was a day and age, and it's not that long ago, where if the first number in your height wasn't 6, you were not going to be highly considered at quarterback. I think the game has changed a little bit. I think that some of the views have changed a little bit. Bryce Young certainly is not 6 feet tall. Bryce Young certainly is not 200 pounds. I mean, he is a slight guy, but all the talent in the world, has certainly had plenty of talent around him at Alabama, even if the receiver room has kind of been more one note as of late than it was maybe prior to him. What is the range that could be there on Bryce Young? He certainly could go number 1. He's in your list of these top quarterbacks. But I've also heard analysts come out and say, I'm concerned on his size and how he's going to be able to handle the NFL game. So, what is your thought? And conversely, is it a case of maybe that some of that information is being floated out there? We know that sometimes teams will downgrade a player, even though they really love the guy, just hoping to put everybody else off the scent.
Yeah, that could be it, man. I mean, it's one of those things that I hate about the draft process, but we got to acknowledge it, right? That is a factor, right? So maybe it is a team trying to muddy the waters a little bit and get their guy a little bit lower, kind of decrease the price. We don't know. There's so much that we don't know, and that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it kind of annoying sometimes too. But we try and get through it. Going to the question about him as a prospect specifically, it's not something that's going to take him off the board for me. I think it's something that you have to take into account, right? Because he is probably going to be around 5'11", 190, 195. That's definitely smaller than your average quarterback, right? Now, I think what you have to do beyond that, you can be worried about the projected durability, but I think you have to look back at his college career and see if it's been an issue. And by and large, it hasn't, right? He had an injury that he missed, I think, a game or two this past season. But, aside from that, durability has not been a major concern for him, and he's been, and especially this year, he took a lot of hits in the pocket, but I think he's also very good, with his athleticism and especially his instincts as a creator. I think that's one thing that really shows up. And it's something that none of the guys in this class really have to the degree that Bryce Young has. And that's, he's got great feel for pressure outside the pocket and interior pressure coming up in his face. He's got great feel for lanes to escape through, how to create for himself and stay and kind of, create space and manage space and stay on his feet, keeps his eyes up. I think that creation instincts, that high level creation ability that he has is something that really helps keep him safe sometimes, right? Helps keep him, clean for the most part. So that's something I think he can rely on in the NFL because he's got both tools. He's got the athleticism to do it and he's got the feel, the instincts for it. And that's a really good combination to have. And he's got, the arm elasticity to throw off script, off platform and maintain accuracy. So, I think the tools are there. If you're looking at a guy who's 5'11", 190, 195, and you're thinking, is he going to be able to withstand it? I think Bryce Young, with his elite creation capacity, can definitely do it. So, that's something that doesn't worry me a ton. I do want to see him become a little bit more consistent as a processor in the pocket. Sometimes there are lanes, windows over the middle of the field that he'll miss. Sometimes lanes that CJ Stroud, you'll see him take and anticipate. So I think Young's a little bit more inconsistent in that department, right? But he's got pretty good accuracy. He's got the athleticism and the creation ability, the it factor. You never want to use that term too much, right? But looking at how Bryce Young navigated through muddy waters and kind of calmed the storm through chaotic situations so much this season for that Alabama team with the receiving core that he had and the inconsistent offensive line, you can't say that there's something special there for sure. Now you obviously got to stay within reason, right? It could be a concern, but I do think he has the creation capacity, the instincts, and just the general feel, and the toughness, the poise under pressure as well to get through it.
I could ask 30 more questions about quarterbacks, but we got to keep it moving on. Once again, you're watching the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Ian Cummings of Pro Football Network, and we are talking about the NFL draft process for 2023, several key targets out there. Haven't talked about Ohio State wide receiver Jaxon Smith-Njigba. You have him going 22 to Baltimore in your most recent mock draft. Obviously, a major disappointment for Ohio State fans that he barely played this year. The last image anybody really has of him is the Rose Bowl game against Utah, where he went nuts, set some crazy bowl records. But, I think that coming out of that, there was a belief that Jaxon Smith-Njigba, give him the Biletnikoff at this point. He's going to be wide receiver one when he comes out of there. I mean, now we're seeing him in the low teens, the 20s, the late 20s in a lot of mocks. I mean, I really consume as much NFL draft content as I can. This is a show I've been looking forward to doing. What is your overall view of JSN and how much, what maybe has a little bit of this slide that people may see, or is it a case of now that we're up to it? I mean, he's not particularly big. He's not particularly this when we're really kind of looking at making multi-million-dollar investments in guys. We're really kind of starting to see under the hood.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's going to be an interesting discussion, right? Because I think, this class especially is a great opportunity for him to go higher than he would in another year because there isn't a consensus wide receiver one. Quentin Johnston from TCU is my wide receiver one. I'm willing to bank on the upside there, but he's not a sure thing, and he's a lot farther from a sure thing than the wide receiver one from previous classes, right? So there's a lot of room for variance every year, but especially this year. And that's something that could open the door for JSN. I've always had him kind of on the first round, second round fringe. I'm starting to warm up to him a little bit more, as I reevaluate, and I'm going to try and reevaluate guys one more time before the draft process and reevaluate those grades and see how the numbers add up. But for me, you mentioned, he's not particularly big. I think he's got good size, right? I mean, like above average size. He's obviously not a overwhelming strength for him, but he's around 6'2", 200, right? You can work with that. That's something you can work with. He's decently physical. I think the big thing for JSN is that the things that a receiver has to do to win a rep, he is outrageously consistent at those things. I mean, you look at the separation ability, the spatial awareness, the ability to manipulate the tempo and pacing of his routes and the leverage, and kind of manipulate blind spots. That's all there for him. And then when he is open, he can make the play, but when he's contested too, he has outrageous instincts, body control, ball tracking ability, his ability to haul in the pass well imbalanced. I think he's one of the best, if not the best in this class. He's got very sure hands. So the things that you need to do to succeed a wide receiver, he's got those things. What does he not have? I don't think he has elite explosiveness or long speed, and I think that shows up on tape. And I think that, especially playing alongside Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave in 2021, that's something that showed up a lot. He's got all the things that you need, but, when you need a guy to stretch space a little bit, to create after the catch a little bit, and JSN can do that too. I think he's very agile for his size. I think he's a really slippery route runner for his size, which that'll help you. He's pretty twitchy, right? Even if he's not super explosive laterally, he can make guys miss. He can offset defenders. So that gives him some credit there. But if you're looking for a guy who could stress defenses with their speed and explosiveness, he's not quite there, the way that Wilson and Olave were. And that kind of dilutes his upside a bit for me personally. But I do think, he could be a worthy late first round pick because I do think that he can be that guy who comes in and just churns out 1,000-yard seasons left and right. One thing that I wanted to see from him this year that we didn't really get a chance to, playing with Wilson and Olave, he played out of the slot a lot, right? So you get free releases. You don't play press as often. And he's not an overwhelming, size threat, right? So I would have liked to see more reps on the boundary, against press, using your length and those releases to get past. We didn't see that. I do think he has the tools to do it because he's a very quick receiver in the short ranges. He's very nuanced, very detail oriented, and he has shown that he can be physical. I think it shows up as a run blocker too. You see the physicality there. That's something that could translate across phases. But we didn't see it, so that's still kind of an overbearing question that I want to have answered. But provided that he can show that, he's shown he can move around and be used in motion a little bit. And when he's a receiver, the pure receiver foundational building blocks that you need to succeed, he's one of the best. So I could definitely see him, he's going to be more in the late first round range for me, but could definitely see him going into the NFL and being a very stable piece right away and being a very, very valuable piece of an NFL offense. For, it's just if you're weighing him against other top receiver prospects, the upside comes into play. And that's going to be a different ranking for everybody. But I think there's a lot of room. He could be your wide receiver 1. He could be your wide receiver 3. There's variance across the board. And I think any argument is going to be valid.
With apologies to Cameron Brown and to Ronnie Hickman, we're only going to talk one defensive player here, and then we're going to go rapid fire to wrap the show up. But let's talk a little Zach Harrison, defensive end, 5-star recruit coming into Ohio State. Had moments where he flashed, had moments where maybe he wasn't able to get home some things. I mean, Larry Johnson always likes to rotate defensive linemen. So you don't have a system to where you're getting 60 snaps on defense. That's just not going to happen. I've seen Harrison firmly in the second round in a lot of mock drafts. I mean, he's somebody who I believe will test very well in Indianapolis. I believe, very cerebral kid, he's got a physical freak. I think that I think he's going to blow up on the vert. I think he's going to do well in the 40. I think that there are a lot of things he does well. What is your view on Harrison?
Well, yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the first part. He's going to test incredibly well. I mean, if I remember correctly, he had 40 in the 4.4s out of high school, right? So, I mean, at his size, 6'6", around 270 with 35, 36-inch arms. I mean, the dude is a freak, and that alone will get you into the day 2 range, maybe even round 2, maybe even a surprise round 1 pick. Again, I hate to address that, but as we mentioned earlier, right, there's always at least a 0.01% chance for a lot of guys, and Harrison has that chance. If someone really likes the upside, really likes the vision they have for him, he could go that high. I have him as more of a day 2 guy, but I think the trades could definitely lock him in that range. And I think that's the first thing you got to bring up with him, because as you mentioned, he never quite put it together in college, right? He never quite put it together with the consistency that you'd want from him. And that's something that showed up even in the Georgia game. The hand placement can still be a little more consistent. The leverage acquisition isn't always smooth for him. I think he can be more efficient loading and exerting, on his power rushes, right? But there were flashes of brilliance. I go back to the end of that Maryland game, going up against a very talented tackle in Jalen Duncan, and he was using his length, his power, bend, explosiveness, active hand usage, and multitasking around the apex. If that's what he can be at his best, then that's something you draft early, right? So I look at that, and I look at the upside. If he's going to run in the 4.4s and get a 40-inch vertical at 6'6", 270, that's going to do a lot of good things for him. And me personally, I like the projected versatility that he offers. He can play on the edge. He can set a strong edge at 5 tech, but I would love to, get him on a hybrid defensive line where you can move guys around and move him inside the 4-eye, maybe even 3 tech for certain matchups, and just let him use his explosiveness and length to just bore open holes in the line. And I think that, he has the upside to be that move piece if you really want him to. So I think there's a lot of potential to work with there. And potential is what gets guys, moving up the board. So I think we'll see it at the combine. To me, he's still not quite in that top tier of edge rushers because he needs more refinement, because he's still not that, consistent guy down in and down out. But the tools are very, very appealing, and that's something that'll help him out a lot.
Yeah, there certainly were some Ohio State defensive players that maybe didn't necessarily have the results in college, but have been doing very well in the NFL. Baron Browning, Pete Werner, some guys like that. I mean, obviously talking different positions, but it certainly happens. Let's get to these rapid fire questions again, provided by our great members at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Be sure to check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Who's the day 2 or day 3 guy that you're pounding the table for this year?
All right, rapid fire. I got to control myself because I can get long winded. But day two or day three guy, I'll go with Texas defensive tackle Moro Ajomo. Was a very good performer at the Shrine Bowl. 6'2.5", 293 pounds, 34.5 inch arms, explosive, powerful, really smart guy off the field too. I would bank on him succeeding.
Somebody asking, top end talent seems a little bit down this year. Would you agree?
I would agree. I do think you don't quite have as many blue chip prospects, but I think the consolation prize is that there's a ton of depth in that 25 to 125 range, that mid round range. I think there's a lot of quality prospects there. So I think we don't see as much top end talent, but there's going to be plenty of opportunities to get good players in round 4, round 5, maybe even round 6.
Which position is the deepest in the draft this year, and conversely, which one is the thinnest?
Corner is the deepest, definitely cornerback. I think there's a ton of players that will be very good players. I think, and you've got a lot of different molds too. Boundary guy, slot guy, hybrid safety, slot guy. There's a lot of different flavors and a lot of talented players with length, explosiveness. I think the cornerback class is very strong. The linebacker class, I would say, is the thinnest. I think that you've got a few intriguing guys at the top, but I don't have a round one player personally in this linebacker class, and I think the depth definitely dips a lot below that. So I think you're going to be looking at guys falling down the board a bit. Maybe some teams are taking swings, but this linebacker class is going to be heavily dependent. Every prospect is dependent on their coaching, their landing spot, but I think especially the linebackers.
Been a lot of talk through the years recently, kind of the devaluation of running backs in the NFL draft, backsliding a little bit deeper. I mean, just the life cycle, the NFL life cycle of a running back seems to be a little bit shorter. What's the highest you would take a top running back?
Personally, I would be hesitant to take one top 10. I think it depends on your team situation ultimately. I look at the team like the Eagles, right? They have a top 10 pick from the Saints, and they can afford to take that luxury if they really wanted to. And I look at a guy like Bijan Robinson, we just mentioned in a previous question, the top end talent in this class is a little bit lower, but Bijan is a blue chip running back prospect for me. So if you're the Eagles and you are willing to take that luxury, then you can take him at 10. But if you're a team that has too many holes to take that luxury, and a lot of teams picking early are, then I would avoid it. I think, for me, I would probably go, second half of round 1 if I'm in that situation. It's just one of those positions that's a little more dependent on the offensive line and the situation around you.
I'm going to read this question as it's written, and we can kind of work through it. Well, what would you rate the position groupings in terms of importance in today's NFL? Obviously, quarterback was and always will be number one, but positions like linebacker, safety, and running back have certainly moved down the list in recent years. Would be interested to see how you rate that today. So, I mean, right, if you're going into the draft, I guess he's talking about in terms of just impactful and what could change the fortunes of a team. Quarterback certainly is going to be number one. I think that we've really seen offensive tackle be a very much a Cadillac position too. But, outside of that, how do you see it?
Yeah, I would go with quarterback first. I think, I'll preface real quick. Every position is important to a degree, right? So you never want to leave a glaring hole on your roster, right? But if all things are equal and you have a chance to address one before the other, I would go with the positions that impact the pass on either side of the ball. So for the offense, the offensive tackle, as you mentioned, protecting your quarterback, wide receivers getting open and allowing your quarterback, more time to work with, allowing him to make quicker decisions, right? And then on the defensive side, edge rushers and interior defensive linemen, pressuring the opposing quarterback, and also the cornerbacks on the boundary, jamming those receivers, delaying their releases, and forcing the quarterback to hang in the pocket for longer periods of time, opening up opportunities for the pass rush. I would weigh those positions first, the positions that impact the passer on either side of the ball, and then go to positions like linebacker and running back. They can impact the passer, they can impact the game. But I think, if I had to weigh one position over the other, it would be the positions that more directly and more consistently impact the passing game, which is the most dynamic element in today's NFL. You get ahead with the pass and you stay ahead with the run, right? So, I would be more prudent to, weigh that over the other.
And last question, this one I didn't give you on the list, but I mean, I think this one's easy enough here. We have a lot of Browns fans and a lot of Bengals fans based on being an Ohio State site and just the proximity of both teams. Put on your GM cap. What are you valuing most with your first pick if you're the Browns general manager, and what are you valuing most with your pick if you're the Bengals general manager?
It's an interesting one. I think the Bengals, they could go a lot of different ways. Lyle Collins obviously was, lost to an injury, and his contract makes it so that there's an out this year. So if they want to replace him with a right tackle in this draft, we mentioned Dawand Jones. He could be an option late in round one. Darnell Wright from Tennessee could also be an option. Cornerback is one that's been kind of floated out there, and I could see them going corner, but the class is very deep at cornerback as well. So I think there's an opportunity to get a right tackle. Cam Taylor-Britt played pretty well down the stretch, so I would be comfortable keeping him on the boundary opposite Chidobe Awuzie, and go right tackle and then corner. For the Browns, personally, I look at their interior defensive line. To me, that's still a pretty sparse position group for them. So in round two, I don't think they have a round one pick, but in round two, where they pick first, I'd be looking at a guy like Gervon Dexter. That's who I picked for them in the mock draft, a guy who's, big, long, powerful, but also really strong as a run defender, so he can maintain that. You could go wide receiver as well. I think there's still room to up that position group. And if you want to get the most, bang for your buck on the Deshaun Watson trade, then you need to equip him with the weapons he needs to succeed outside of Amari Cooper. So I could see wide receiver, defensive tackle for them. I think there's a lot of different ways to go for both teams, but that's my first inclination.
That pretty much hits the questions. One more question I got for you, just a chance to kind of talk about yourself and your organization. It's February 9th now. I don't think we really get into Indianapolis much before. I mean, at least for me, I won't get in before the 28th. Mm-hmm. What do you do now between the Senior Bowl and the NFL scouting combine? I mean, obviously, you seem to know a lot about every player, so I can't even imagine the amount of film study and everything you go through. But how do you feel these next couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean, if you can believe it, more film study. I mean, it never ends, man. I swear. I mean, I know a lot about the players that I have studied, but there's still more ground to cover, still more reports to write up. And, there's always room to get a deeper understanding for players as well. So guys that, I have a good impression of, like Anthony Richardson. I have a very good impression of him already, but I do want to go through the tape one more time and just see if there's something that I didn't, give enough credence before, so cross-checking is going to be big during this stage, but also, looking at the combine invite list, who got invited, who do I want to write up and look at a little more closely before the event. So it's just always trying to cover more ground that you haven't covered yet, and then cross-checking guys that you've already covered. And yeah, it just goes like that to the combine, and then we see what happens there, digest the numbers, and then it's on to the pro days and the NFL draft. But it's just it's a conveyor belt, man. It's kind of similar all throughout the year, but more evaluation is always the first thing on the board.
And if people want to keep in touch and read your work one more time, how can people follow you and check out all your great evaluations?
Yeah, so you can follow me at IC_draft on Twitter. I've got a thread of all my scouting reports pinned at the top of my profile. And if you have any prospect specific, school specific, just general questions for me, feel free to hit me up there.
There you go. Ian, I want to thank you for being part of the show. I promised you 30 minutes. We went a little over 40. We probably could have gone 100 if we're honest.
Listen, that's on me. I mean, I warn everybody when I come on, like, 30 minutes, trust me, we're gonna go 40. I'm sorry, I can't contain myself, but it's always fun to talk draft with you guys.
And definitely, I would look forward to maybe trying to connect in Indianapolis at the combine and get you on more. I mean, I certainly really enjoy everything you guys do at Pro Football Network and would like to be able to do more with you guys.
Yes, sir. The feeling is mutual. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank everybody for sticking with us for 40 minutes of NFL draft talk. If you have any questions, be sure to put them in the comments. And until then, we will talk to you very soon.